this might give you an idea of how we are working with UK industry and with other partners as well to try and help the manufacturing sectors adopt digital technologies, but also behave in the best way in order to exploit them. We are fundamentally the UK national standards body. We are a company incorporated by Royal Charter. We are not a government department. We are not a regulator. I am not a civil servant. We make something like 95% of our revenues come from paying customers. And so we stand on our own 2 feet, providing services and documents and information directly to industry. We have members, such as the people from industry, and we have committee members who help us write those standards, which are the best practice, the consensus best practice of the experts within a particular field, and that's what a standard really is. We are also the UK member of ISO and IEC and CEN and CENELEC. These are all the big international and European standards organisations. We sit on the board of ETSI, which is the European Telecommunications body, and we have a similar relationship with the ITU. So if there's anything happening internationally within standards, you can be pretty sure BSI is involved in some way. You may have some kind of certification. You may see us as the organisation, the company that you employ to come around and certify your management systems against, say, ISO 9001 or AS 9100 or something like that. We are not that part of the business. That part of the business is a professional and commercially competitive certification body, which stands apart from the standards making part of the business. So if you've got any questions about certification, I'm afraid I don't really know about that, because we deliberately keep the two separate, because it's a very different mission that you have. So why would we be interested in looking at a highly innovative area such as digital manufacturing? Well, we were asking ourselves the question a few years ago, why is it other countries like the US and like Germany have a much better track record at commercialising technologies? And to help us answer that question, we employed my mate Owen O'Sullivan at the Institute for Manufacturing at the University of Cambridge. And he did some really, really good research. And what he did, he looked at what happens in Germany, what happens in the US, and what happens in the UK, obviously. And the difference is this, or one of the differences is this. In the US and in Germany, with federal R&D investments, they consider the role of standards at the very early stages of investment and work out what it is strategically that needs to be done in order for the successful commercialisation to eventually happen. And it's not the kind of thing we've traditionally done in the UK. In the UK, we traditionally just sat there and waited for industry to come to us and tell us that they needed some standards or something like that. And that's often too late. If you take a much more proactive and collaborative early stage way of doing things, what you end up doing is writing a very different set of standards, and also accelerating the rate that innovation happens and ultimately being more successful. So that's one of the reasons why I'm here. I'm talking in front of you because we change the way we do things. We come out and we talk to you now, and we interact with you and other stakeholders in order to really understand what it is that needs to be done and get those programs and collaboration set up. So hopefully that makes sense. And when we're talking about standards, you might have different views on what that means. Back in the day, BSI was created in the very early 20th century to standardise railway profiles, because there was too many. So that was very much the basis on which BSI started to write standards throughout the 20th century, was to enable interoperability, to reduce unnecessary variation, things like that. So that kind of makes sense. And then as industry became more global, more complicated, in the second half of the 20th century, we started to write more of the process standards, management system standards that you may well be familiar with. And something else has happened more recently, is that we've been asked to develop a consensus on what matters to people and how people behave and the principles and values that underpin the way that companies operate. So you end up with like these three different layers of standards being developed to support the successful and efficient operation of supply chains and marketplaces. Just to give you a few examples of them, the product standards are the interoperable ones. The process standards are the ones you're probably quite familiar with. The management systems and things like that. This third type of standards is often things like BS 11,000, which helps collaborations to collaborate better. We've got something called robot ethics that came out this year, which means that when people are designing robots and the operation of robots, they can do so in a way which the end result is more ethical, or can be guaranteed to be ethical, and it behaves as people would expect and doesn't have horrible, unwanted consequences. So hopefully that makes sense. Just to give you an example of where we're working in this new strategic collaborative way, we were asked by the UK government to work with an organisation known as the Future Cities Catapult down in London. And the Future Cities Catapult bizarrely works in the area of smart cities. And they wanted us to set up a collaboration called the City Standards Institute. And we went into that thinking that it was going to be all about interoperability. Thinking that we would write standards that would enable data to knit together and for machines to talk to other machines within cities and all things like that. But when we got everybody around the table, something peculiar happened. They went, no, the interoperability is not so much of an issue. That's all being dealt with elsewhere. What we really need help with is this. Cities had no understanding or didn't know where to start when trying to understand where it was they were in terms of their own competence to deliver digital services. And they needed some help to do that. So we developed something which was a benchmarking standard, which basically enabled them to self-assess themselves on a matrix of digital competence and to work out where they were in relation to their peers on this kind of matrix. And they also wanted some guidance in helping those cities move up that matrix towards becoming more digitally competent, if you like. So that's really the heart of much of what we've ended up doing in smart cities through taking a very early stage interaction. Another one is building information modelling. You may be familiar with BIM. BIM is something which was brought in as a requirement by the UK government for procurement within big construction projects. And by developing these ways of working within what was called BIM Level 2, which was a much more collaborative approach in the build stage of construction projects, they've managed to save many, many billions of pounds a year in unnecessary costs. And the idea is that when this is extended into BIM Level 3, BIM Level 3 will be the services that you deliver on top of these built assets at the operation phase. They're doing something similar. They want to do this more efficiently and accelerate the rate at which this happens through the widespread adoption of practices. That means everybody aligns their expectations much more efficiently and collaborates more effectively. The word is collaboration. So, you're here to listen really about digital manufacturing. Once upon a time, UK manufacturing looked like this. We had the first industrial revolution, which to people from Lancashire like me was all about cotton mills on the West Pennines, employing Irish immigrants like my forefathers, and working in factories like this. Now, the owners of this particular factory, they owned the coal mine up the road, they owned the brick quarry up the road, they owned everything apart from the cotton itself, which had to be brought in from the southern states of America. They did everything, but the world is not going to be like that anymore. Digital technologies will enable you to specialise much more quickly and to interact with people on a global scale much more effectively. So we weren't clear what it is we wanted to do or what it is BSI should do in order to help UK industry innovate and adopt digital technologies more effectively. So again, we went back to the Institute for Manufacturing at the University of Cambridge, and we, with a bit of funding from government, we decided to try and work out exactly what it is we need to do. And we've finished that project now, but we've gone somewhere down the line. I'll give you a few examples of the outputs that we've had. This is a definition of digital manufacturing. And the most important word there to me is in the very first bullet point, and that word is collaborative. It's not about the technology, it's about the way you behave once you've got it. The model that we developed as part of this project looks a bit like this. This is the 10 scenarios with which manufacturing supply chains will adopt digital technologies. Now, rather than go into them in any great detail, you can group them into 3 very unequal groups. If you look at 1 and 6, that is basically you're a manufacturer and you're procuring your bits coming in, and if you can digitally track them, and then you can track them on the way out, on the way to the customer, those 2 are very much connected. 2 to 5 are largely the smart factory. What are the different elements that your smart factory will have if you can digitize them? So at the very least, you will design it digitally. Then you will use that to execute your manufacturing scheduling. Then you will hopefully be able to have a much more flexible line which can deliver many different products much more quickly than otherwise. And then there's the underlying technologies that deliver that, such as additive manufacturing. So that's generally, that's quite obvious, the smart factory. That's a given. When we talk about manufacturing, though, we talk about the full life cycle. We don't just talk about the smart factory level. What happens when you connect digital supply chains, or supply chains digitally, from end to end throughout the life of the product? Well, you end up with these 4 at the bottom. And what you can do then, you can design your networks in an optimal way. You can assess your product's quality, not just in your factory, but in the entire supply chain. And very importantly, you can manage the information that comes from that product throughout its life, which gives all kinds of opportunities around services, around improved product design, and all things like that. In our research, those 4 scenarios at the bottom look like the ones where the UK opportunity really lay. It's very clear now that Germany, when in its Industry 4.0 program, will be very good at the smart factory elements and at having really, really good high productivity manufacturing lines, particularly within automotive. And they will do that by having lots and lots of robots in the factory environment. The Japanese are likely to have a mix of people and robots within a factory, operating to a very high quality of manufacture. And the Americans are very much into garage manufacturing and having lots of redistributed manufacturing. Nobody's really talking about the through life elements, and that is really what the UK is good at. And we think the bottom 4 there is probably where the UK will find its sweet spot and really exploit the opportunities from the digitisation of manufacturing supply chains. This is kind of a graphical illustration of how easy it is for each of those scenarios to come about. The top right here is the ones that are the easiest to come about. The bottom left are the hardest to come about, and there's a very clear split there. The ones at the top right are the smart factory ones. That is the ones where it requires one company to change the way it works in order for it to successfully come about. The bottom ones, the bottom left ones, are the ones where the UK opportunity lies. They're the hardest to come about. So there's real need for some action on a large scale for the adoption of changes in behaviour that are consistent across many supply chains, across many sectors. Because you've got to, for it to be successful, lots of people have got to change their behaviour quickly and in the same way. So that's given us quite a good starting point to look into these things. So what we are now doing is we're moving on to the next stage. I said we were working with the IFM at Cambridge. We're now still working with the IFM, but we're also working with the High Value Manufacturing Catapult. They are looking at putting in a big proposal at next year's budget to fund a large-scale project in digital manufacturing. And as one of those elements, they would like a big standards element within that, and they'd like us to run that. And so what we are doing is building on the outputs of that project and these 5 particular areas where they think standards might help, or the development of the right standards will help, and that's what we're going to be doing in the next few months. I'll just go through these in a bit more detail. Obviously, interoperability, even though I didn't quite dismiss it at the beginning, it is still very important. So the Germans are leading the international work, and we want to make sure that the UK voice is heard in international standards development that makes data interoperable. Something you hear quite a lot is that many UK SMEs are not very confident about using data this increased number of data that digitisation will give them. And so what we are looking into is how we could help them be more competent and be better at using these fast-moving, large volumes of data, which will be coming their way very soon if they do it properly. Digitisation is obviously not risk-free. People don't want to lose their IP. They don't want to get sued. They want to do everything in a legal way and which is accepted by all. So it's got to be properly governed. So all those things that I've just mentioned, IT security, IP protection, traceability, all those things need to be thought out and put into place before people will invest with confidence. And we need to think about how the right standards programs will achieve that. There will be an increase in reliance on digital twins for various reasons. There will be digital twins of factories and machines. There will be digital twins of entire networks. But they will only be useful and add productivity gains if they actually give results that people believe or can trust. So we will also be looking into how we can help that assurance regime of digital twins be brought into place. And last and by certainly no means least is this idea of collaboration. We already have standards on collaboration, BSI 11,000. It's very important that we look at how the innovation culture and the collaborative culture of companies within these sectors can be brought along and accelerated through the adoption of consensus-based standards. And so that's something that we will look at. Now that is everything I've got to talk about.